is high if they do it by themselves, they can engage the microfinance institutions as the retail distributors of these funds. So the future, the mainstream banks will have to think it seriously. Minimum of 5%. If we go by 5% of their total assets, then it comes to a huge amount, because total assets comes to, of the commercial banking sector, comes to about 2.5 trillion rupees. If we add the banks like Sanasa Development Bank and others, the total assets comes to about 4 trillion. So if they can just 1% of that total assets, if they can allocate for microfinance sector, then we have an enormous amount of funding, and we don't have to wait for the donors to come and fund us. So one additional requirement for mainstream commercial banks to do it, they'll have to train their staff. We know all commercial banking training programs are based on risk management, assets and liability management, and how to mobilize deposits, and how to lend to the corporate sector, how to restructure the corporate defaulting customers. Those are the type of training which the mainstream commercial banks are presently providing to their own staff. And there is no any training. I have not seen any training that they are providing to microfinance, because when I was the chairman of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka, with the support of GTZ and the Frankfurt School of Management, we introduced a high-level diploma program in microfinance in Sri Lanka. I actually anticipated all the mainstream commercial banks to send participants. None of the commercial banks sent. Eventually, we had to depend on the MFIs, who had dominated some people for the participants in the training program, because this is a high-level, internationally recognized training program. So training in microfinance by mainstream commercial banks is a must, and the senior management will have to think of it. So by having this microfinance window, mainstream commercial banks also will benefit, because they are simply building up their future clientele. We know, if we speak to Bank of Ceylon or People's Bank, the two state banks, they are proud about some of the top-level entrepreneurs in this country, because they say those top-level entrepreneurs were nurtured by them as very small customers, maybe some 30 to 40 years ago. Similarly, the future clientele of the mainstream commercial banks can be developed and built if the commercial banks participate actively in the microfinance program. So this is the role which the commercial banks will have to play. Then the MFIs. Now we have MFIs, and I can remember when there was an idea of supervising and regulating the MFIs in Sri Lanka, and we in the central bank were asked to do the regulation and supervision. And we didn't know how many MFIs were there, and we had to get the Department of Census and Statistics to conduct an island-wide survey to find out how many MFIs are there in the Sri Lanka. There are some 20,000 odd MFIs. Of course, the 80 to 85% of the total industry is managed by 5 large MFIs, but there are 20,000 odd. And none of these MFIs have any governance structure. My guess is that they have been mushroomed, not because they want to provide an effective support to microfinance sector, just to get the support, get the funds from the donors. So it's a donor-initiated MFI industry. So they must go for a good governance structure. It matters, because without the governance, we cannot trust them. Then they have to wean away from donor syndrome, because they are depending on the donor funding. They'll have to think of ways of mobilizing funds within Sri Lanka. If they maintain their accounting principles, auditing standards properly, they are in a position to raise money in the capital market. They can mobilize deposits. So therefore, they have to wean away from the donor syndrome, and they have to train their staff, and they'll have to use new technology, that is ICT, to lend this money at a cheaper cost by maintaining a lower transaction cost in funding this money. So this is the role of MFIs. Then the microfinance customers also, they also have a role. Now in Sri Lanka, for more than, I think, 5 to 6 decades, We have developed our poor people with the subsidy syndrome because the government had been helping them continuously with free handouts, and people are used to that. And if we withdraw the free handout, probably there will be a social revolution also against the government. So they will have to depend on self-reliance. This is the most important factor. And this is what we did in the ISRU project. In the ISRU project, the main message that we delivered to the beneficiaries was that do not depend on the government funding. Do not depend on the government's frequent and periodical loan forgiveness programs. Depend on your own feet. Stand on your own feet. So they will have to depend on self-reliance. They will have to inculcate financial literacy, because most important factor is that the poor people should know how to earn money, how to save money, how to maintain their accounts, and how at the end of the day to ascertain their profits or losses. If you don't know that, you don't know how to sell your product. So financial literacy is a must. Therefore, they must keep on learning. And the most important factor is that whenever they produce some products which are to be sold in the local economy, which has a very limited scope in Sri Lanka, because ours is a very small economy in terms of both the population as well and income, they will have to have a mechanism to get them integrated to the global economy. The first they have to produce for the local economy, but later on they must think of getting integrated to global economy. So to do that, they have to go for quality, reputation of the products, and continuous improvement. The authorities, the most important factor is they will recognize this, that there is a sector called industry called microfinance industry, which is not there today. It must be part and parcel of the overall policy initiative of the authorities. The microfinance industry has to be recognized. At the same time, they have to recognize the fact that some of these microfinance institutions will have to become mainstream banks, and we'll have to support those institutions to become mainstream banks. So the regulation and supervision, which is now very much in demand in Sri Lanka, it should be a friendly regulation and supervision system. It's not to kill the microfinance industry. They must have a proper friendly regulation system, because otherwise what would happen is, because this is still at the very initiative level in Sri Lanka. And if you try to use the same yardsticks that you use for supervising and regulating the mainstream commercial banks to supervise and regulate the microfinance institutions, then that will be the end of the microfinance institution. So it should be, and also the authorities will have to think of introducing more safety ropes than safety nets. Because here in Sri Lanka, we are used to help the poor by extending them, by throwing at them safety nets so that they cannot fall onto the ground. But the safety nets, the danger is that they are forever in the net. There's no incentive for them to rise up and come up. So we'll have to throw safety ropes so that they can catch the rope and they can come out. So this is the most important factor, and that needs a major policy revision in the government. The most important factor the government should do is they must help the small-scale entrepreneurs to get integrated to global economy, because without selling in the global market, we cannot do anything. So this is my brief presentation, and I would like to answer your questions at the question time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vijayavardhana. Thanks. I'm sure that you will have lots of questions. I myself noted a couple of questions. We will come to the question and answer session later. Now I would like to invite Mr. Riyansi Vijayatilaka to.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the panel, distinguished organizing gentlemen and ladies, participants, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak about a very relevant topic which has been very close to my own self in my professional career over the years. We have to focus on the topic itself, the present state and the way forward. In fairness to the foreign delegates who are here, I believe what we talk or what I present will be relevant to the situations in your countries as well, particularly in the region. Well, friends, microfinancing or SMI or whatever you may call it, the need for us to, the financial institutions and the state and the strong organization to assist the village people in whatever way form has been a focus over the last 50 years at least since independence. In fairness, many institutions, particularly the state banks in the 50s and the 60s, made a lot of efforts to bring about economic opportunities for the poor people. In fact, in the 1970s and the 1980s, I believe, I was still working in the branch network of HNB, we had a special SMI scheme floated by, a credit line floated by the ADB from Manila headquarters, where we gave loans through to development banks, onward lending through the banks like ours. So attempts have been made over the years to assist this sector. The question obviously asks, why haven't we had visible results or actual development? In my view, ladies and gentlemen, the main factor has been that none of us at that, throughout this period, none of the institutions have had a look at the total picture at any time. Even now, people are talking of financing, microfinancing. I believe very strongly that there are much more to the village development of the economy than financing alone itself. That is what we all as traditionally have to see. That's what I intend telling you the next few minutes. There were many attempts. We had the Janasavya movement. We had, I think, 1973, we had a very senior politician called Hector Kobbekadua who introduced agricultural service centers, which I believe now that would have been one of the best schemes if it was ever properly implemented. He had a one-stop shop for industrialists, farmers, cultivators, where they could have had not only the financing, the counseling, the fertilizing, medical facilities, everything. But unfortunately, what happened was the political leadership did not implement it properly. They took young graduates to be in charge of the units, and they had no idea about what all this was all about. And the scheme became a total failure. Like that, genuine efforts have been made over the years to promote microfinancing. But unfortunately, we haven't seen the development. Ladies and gentlemen, let's face one thing. I think it applies to all the region. In every country where we live, we have at least 75% of our population is village-based. Particularly Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India, we have 75% at least. We are all doing everything possible in the urban areas towards economic development. But how many of us realize that unless this 75% of the villagers are looked after and assisted to promote their own economies, what are we talking about economic progress of the country as a whole? That, I believe, has been a shortcoming that we all have faced and been responsible for. The village economy has to be strong for a country to progress economically. When you say village economy, it just simply does not mean providing finance, opening a bank branch and giving money. That happens. A branch manager will give a loan to an industrialist or a cultivator.